High up in the Himalayas, way up, sits a sanctuary of incredible faith, the Kedarnath Temple. For millions of people, it's a direct line to the divine. But it's also a place of these deep, nagging questions. A place where science and miracles just seem to crash into each other, leaving behind mysteries that have lasted for centuries. So, in this explainer, we're going to try to peel back the layers of mystery around one of Hinduism's most sacred sites. We'll look at how it was even built, its epic origin story, a pretty chilling prophecy about its end, and a sacred ritual that just seems to defy all known logic. Okay, first, just think about this for a second. The temple gets locked up for 6 months of the most brutal Himalayan winter. They leave a single lamp burning inside. 6 months later, they open the doors and it's still lit. How? And if that's not enough, there's the story of its unbelievable survival. We have geologists and historians who confirm the temple was literally buried and tombed in a glacier for 400 years. And when they finally found it again, it was perfectly fine, not a scratch. And then there's this, maybe the spookiest mystery of them all. There's a prophecy written in sacred texts that says one day the mountains themselves are going to move and the temple will just vanish forever. So let's start with what we can actually see and touch. The temple itself is just an architectural marvel. It seems to completely ignore the laws of nature and, the limits of technology back then. Right off the bat, how this thing was built is a huge puzzle. It's made of these enormous, super heavy stone slabs that are all interlocked with insane precision. And the source material points out that these specific stones, they're not from anywhere nearby. We're talking about an altitude of 22,000 feet. How on earth could ancient builders with no modern cranes or tech haul these massive blocks up there? For devotees, the answer is pretty simple. It wasn't built by humans. And the temple's ability to just survive, it's really the stuff of legend. But one of its most incredible moments happened way before any of us were around, during a time people called the Mini Ice Age. So for about 400 years, starting way back in the 14th century, the whole Kedarnath Valley was just swallowed by a glacier. The temple completely disappeared under tons and tons of ice. When researchers finally dug the site out in the early 20th century, they were just floored. After 4 centuries under the crushing weight of a glacier, the temple was almost perfect. It was like it was just waiting there, challenging everything we think we know about ancient buildings. This insane resilience was put to the test again, much more recently. In June of 2013, a truly horrific disaster struck. Unprecedented rainfall caused the Mandakini River to just explode into this furious wall of water and rock and mud, just tearing through the valley. The human cost was absolutely heartbreaking. Over 6,000 people lost their lives. Whole towns were just gone. The force of the flood was just wiping out everything in its path. Buildings, bridges, you name it. It seemed pretty much guaranteed that the ancient temple would be next. But then, something happened that, it just doesn't make any sense. As this roaring wall of death was heading straight for the temple, a single gigantic boulder that was being carried by the flood just stopped. It came to a dead halt only a few meters behind the temple. It acted like a shield, splitting the current and diverting the worst of the flood around both sides of the building. That rock is now called the Bhimshila, which means the divine shield. For the hundreds of people who were hiding inside the temple and survived, it was nothing short of a miracle. And the source material adds another really interesting layer here. It claims that geologists think the rock is over 5,000 years old, and that scientists later tried to move it with modern machinery and couldn't even budge it. This belief in divine protection, it's not something new. It's actually woven right into the temple's very origin story. To really get why this place means so much, we have to go back to the very beginning. A story of war, guilt, and a god being chased across the Himalayas. So, according to the epic Mahabharata, It all started after this devastating war. The Pandava brothers felt this overwhelming guilt and went searching for Lord Shiva to ask for forgiveness. But Shiva was disgusted by all the violence and kept avoiding them, even disguising himself as a bull. Well, one of the brothers, Bhima, figured it out and grabbed the bull by its hump. The moment he did, Shiva's body disappeared and then reappeared in 5 different spots. So, to atone, the brothers built 5 temples to honor him. And these 5 temples are known as the Panch Kedar. Kedarnath, which is the most sacred of them all, is where the bull's hump reappeared. That's why the main idol inside the temple isn't a statue like you might expect. It's this conical rock representing the hump of Lord Shiva. So this story makes the temple not just a place to pray, but a place of deep, profound redemption. Now here's the irony. For a place that's so famous for its endurance, there's a prophecy, a really old one, about its eventual end. A story that foretells its own disappearance. So, the temple sits in this valley with 2 big mountain peaks on either side, known as Nar and Narayan. The prophecy, which comes from ancient texts, says that one day these 2 mountains will slowly move towards each other until they finally become one. And when that happens, the path to Kedarnath will be gone forever, and the temple itself will vanish from sight, buried once again. But the mysteries of Kedarnath aren't just in the rocks and prophecies. They're also flowing in the water. See, around the temple there are these sacred ponds, or kunds, and each one is believed to have its own unique mystical power. Before that massive flood in 2013, there were 5 of these kunds. The flood completely wiped 3 of them out, and they still haven't been found. Of the 2 that are left, the water in Udak Kund is said to be a mix from 5 different oceans, able to grant liberation. But the other one, Retas Kund, this is where it gets really strange. The source claims that the water in this pond is perfectly still until someone chants the mantra Om Namah Shivaya. And at that moment, bubbles start rising up from the bottom. Okay, and all of this brings us to maybe the most famous, most baffling mystery of them all, one that happens every single year like clockwork. It's all about the annual closing of the temple for 6 long, impossible months of winter. Every year when winter hits, the idol of Lord Shiva is carried down the mountain to another temple at a lower altitude so people can still worship for the next 6 months. But before they lock the doors at Kedarnath, the priests do one last ceremony. They clean the inner sanctum and light one single ghee lamp. It's called the Akhand Jyoti, the eternal flame. Then the heavy doors are sealed shut and not a single person goes inside until spring. And when the priests come back 6 months later, trekking through feet of snow, they open the doors and they find the lamp still burning. For centuries, this was just accepted as a divine miracle. But the source tells this incredible story about one man, a sadhu, an ascetic, who was determined to find a more logical explanation. So this story, from the source material, it's about a sadhu who decided he was going to solve the mystery of this eternal flame once and for all. As the priests were doing their final rituals, getting ready to seal the doors, he secretly snuck inside and hid. He had a small bag of fruit with him, just enough to survive, and he was ready to watch and see what really happens in the dark. For the first few days, absolutely nothing happened. By the 4th day, his fruit was gone. He started getting weak, losing hope. He fell into this deep, exhausted sleep. But when he woke up on the 5th day, he saw something impossible. Right next to him, there was a pile of fresh fruit. And the lamp, it was full of ghee again, burning just as bright as when it was lit. The story says he then fell into a deep trance and was only woken up 6 months later by the sound of the temple doors being unsealed. Okay, so here is where the story takes this really wild modern turn. The source material makes this pretty startling claim about CCTV footage from the winter closure. It says that when they reviewed the tapes, they could see some kind of invisible force that would bring fruit and add oil to the lamp. Now, whether that's meant to be taken literally or as some kind of powerful metaphor, it's a perfect example of how ancient faith and modern technology can collide in the most amazing ways. So after all that, we're left with this one big question. Is Kedarnath just a marvel of ancient engineering that happens to be in a really fortunate geological spot, with stories that grew into legends over time? Or is it something more? A place where that line between our world and the divine just gets really, really blurry? The answer, I guess, really just depends on what you're willing to believe.